Okay, so we are now on to our tip number 2. So tip number 2 is to break those names down. So in anatomy, all the pieces of the name are there for a reason. So if you know what the pieces mean, then that's going to help you remember the name. Okay, so the first big suggestion is make sure that you know your general bone feature terms. Okay, so for example, what's the word for hole? Foramen. And if you have multiple holes, there's our foramina. That's just the plural form of foramen, or foramen. If you pronounce it differently, that's perfectly fine as long as you can spell it. So if you know what those words mean, it's going to really, really help you because you already will have a piece of the name already figured out. Okay, so if you haven't done so, make sure you learn those general bone terms. And then another thing that you want to do is, even if there's no official story that someone has told you, go ahead and make up stories for yourself. If you can connect the new information to information that you already have somewhere in your brain, the more connections you can create for that material, the better you're going to remember that new material. Okay, so you really want to work on expanding its presence in your mind by connecting it to material that you already know. So I'm going to tell you a couple of things, and let's give me some examples. So right now what we're doing is we're looking inside of the skull. So we took off the top of the cranium and we're looking inside. Here's the sphenoid bone, temporal bone here. This is the occipital bone, frontal bones in front. Here's the little island of ethmoid bone there. If we're looking at this part here on the occipital bone, we're going to notice a really big hole. This big hole is called the foramen, or foramen, again, however you want to pronounce it is fine, foramen magnum. Okay, so what did foramen mean again? Hole. And so what is magnum referring to? Big, large, right? So this name tells you exactly what it is. It's the big hole, right? It's the foramen magnum. That's this one right here in the occipital bone. Large hole. So another one is looking at, so again on the occipital, so we're looking at from the posterior aspect, looking at the back of the skull. Here would be the sagittal suture. So these two are the parietal bones here, occipital bone there. And we're going to see these jagged little lines. Those jagged little lines are called sutures. And they're called that because they look like sutures. That's where the bones are growing and kind of knitting together. Those are the sutures. Okay, sagittal suture. And this particular suture between the parietal bones and the occipital bones is called the lambdoid suture. Lambdoid suture. And it has its name from the lambda. This is a lambda. The lambda is a Greek letter. So if you kind of expand your understanding of where the name comes from, you tell yourself a little story, that's going to help solidify it into your mind. That's the lambdoid suture. Number 3. So looking at the side here, on your skull, you're going to notice a really, really sharp projection. Okay, so this super, super sharp projection right here. So this is the mastoid process. This is a super sharp projection. It's going to be on the temporal bone there. That is called the styloid process. Styloid process. Okay, it's going to be on the temporal bone there. And that is called a process. So the word process, the process part of the name, that comes from the fact that it is a projection. Anytime you see the word process, it just means it's sticking out. Okay, so for example, this is called the zygomatic process of the temporal bone. It sticks out. So what is a stylus? Okay, so this right here, this is a stylus. It's long, it's pin-like, right? So it's called styloid process. Ooh, sorry, there's a misspelling there. This is the correct spelling. This is not correct. The styloid process is a long and pin-like, sticks out long and straight pointy projection. And the good news is, if you understand like where all those pieces come from, it's actually a 3-for-1. Does anybody else know where the other styloid processes are? So there's one on each of the temporal bones. There are also one on the ulna. This is the ulna here. That's the styloid process. See how it's a long pointy projection? And then it's also found on the radius. So here's the ulna, there's the radius. Here, both of them have these pointy projections at the end of them on the distal side. Those are all styloid process. Okay, so it's 3-for-1, yay. And again, if you can group them together, it'll help you remember each of those 3. Okay, on to mandibular fossa. Okay, so if you look at the bottom of a skull, so see these, they have plastic on mine just because mine's a model. This right here on the temporal bone, this is called the mandibular fossa. So it's on the temporal bone, not on the mandible. Why do you think this is called mandibular fossa? First of all, in order to answer that question, you need to know what a fossa is. What is a fossa? A fossa is a shallow depression. Think of like a sink. That's really what it looks like a basin. So shallow basin-like depression. That's where that part of the name comes from. Why do you think it's called the mandibular fossa? What do you think fits nice and neatly into that depression? Okay, the mandible. That's going to be where the mandible fits nice and neatly into the mandibular fossa, and that's where that part comes from. Okay, so I also want to go over a couple of the kind of easy to find, really distinctive looking landmarks, also known as bone features. And so in this picture here, again, we're looking inside of the skull. And this part right here, this is called, so here's the sphenoid. Okay, this particular model has the boundaries of the bones outlined. So here's sphenoid, there's ethmoid, there's frontal, there's temporal, and occipital in the back. So on the sphenoid bone, in the very middle here, this is called the Sella Turcica. Sella Turcica, which translates to Turkish saddle. This right here is a Turkish saddle. It's different from other types of saddles because it goes up in the front and it goes up in the back. So when you're looking at this bone feature, it looks like a Turkish saddle, and that's where the name comes from. Okay, so don't call it Turkish saddle though. Don't write that on your practicum. Write Sella Turcica. Sella Turcica. That's the one that looks like you're going to ride it. Okay, so there's the Turkish saddle right in the very middle of, what bone was it on? Sphenoid bone. Sphenoid bone. Okay, so if we look at, here's the Sella Turcica from a slightly different angle. So if you look just anterior to the Sella Turcica, this part right here, this is called the crista galli. So the crista galli, that translates to coxcomb. So this is a part of the ethmoid bone. Okay, so remember here is the island of ethmoid floating in the sea of frontal. So the island of ethmoid here. This is the crista galli here, and the crista galli is the part that points up. Notice that the structure immediately surrounding the crista galli is a different structure. That is called the cribriform plate. And in the cribriform plate, it's got a bunch of little holes. It's got some texturing in there, and that's because that's where the olfactory nerves pass through the bone to synapse with the olfactory bulb on the brain. Okay, so crista galli is just the part that sticks up. Cribriform plate is the horizontal part that surrounds that.